Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Taking the Mystery Out of Therapy. My name is Abigail Barbanel, and I've been a psychotherapist for 26 years almost, later this month. This fifth podcast is going to focus on anxiety, and it may not be the only podcast where I would talk about anxiety because it's such a big problem. It's such a common problem as well. But before I start, I wanted to say a few words about some of the things I covered previously. The podcasts are following in a sequential order, so basically they build on each other. You could probably get quite a lot in if you tap into any of them, but it's really worth it to follow them in the order that I put them out. There is a logic to that, and the topics do build on each other. But I still hope that people can get something, even if they just watch one podcast, which is why I sometimes repeat myself. And this is also why I keep repeating my name and I keep saying that I'm a psychotherapist and all that. That's because I don't know when people are going to kind of decide to watch a podcast, and I don't know if they'll watch them in order. So I'd like to welcome everybody and make everybody feel included and not excluded. But as I said, if you follow in the podcasts in order, they do make sense and they do build on one another. My purpose in this series has always been to share with the rest of the world everything that I do with my clients. And when I work with clients in my practice, there is a logical sequence to the way that things work, to the progress we make, to the process that they engage with. So that's what I'm doing here. Now, before I talk about anxiety, I just wanted to say a few things about the practice of integrating the brain. Everything we ever learn depends on connectivity between different brain parts that are relevant to the thing that you're learning. If you're learning and practicing a new language, what you're actually doing is wiring the part of the brain that's responsible to language and also connecting it with other parts of the brain that are relevant to speaking in a language. So psychology is no different at all. In therapy, we use this fundamental principle of how the brain works to change our psychology. And as I said before, if you want to change your psychology, then you need to attend to the connectivity between the two brain parts that are most relevant to our psychology, which are the prefrontal cortex at the front of the brain and the limbic system. We know that the limbic system, and that's a neurological fact, we know that the limbic system shuts down the executive, the prefrontal cortex, whenever it feels triggered into a sense of threat. That's its job. Its job is to keep us alive. So it takes over. And I explained in the previous podcast and the one before, I touched also on that and why that made sense in terms of evolutionary biology. So one of the things we know from Dan Siegel's work on interpersonal neurobiology is that if you integrate those two brain systems better together, the limbic brain is no longer able to take charge so easily, and it's increasingly possible to function more and more out of the prefrontal cortex, which regulates everything about us. It regulates the body, it regulates our emotion, it regulates our behavior, and it gives us all those qualities that make us feel like competent adults in our modern complex world. I just wanted to show you once again these two quotes from Dan Siegel, which are very important. I will also place this particular slide on the resources page of my website. It's at fully human, one word, fullyhuman.co.uk. Look for clients and public resources, and you will find a lot of the things that I'm using in this podcast, you will find there. I will later on show you that part of the website as well. Let me share with you that quick slide just to tell you one about the properties that the prefrontal cortex gives us, and the other thing about what the integration actually does to us psychologically. So let me share that. So as you can see, Dan Siegel lists 9 traits that are involved, that are given to us, if you like, or functions that are enabled by the middle prefrontal cortex. They include regulating our bodies, attuning to others, which means we kind of have the ability to make a mental map of other people, of other people's inner state. We have emotional balance. That the prefrontal cortex enables us to calm fear very easily. We can pause before acting, which means we are thoughtful, we're able to stop and think about what we do and choose our action, whereas the limbic brain is reactive and can be quite impulsive, and it will act based on what's pre-wired into it. The prefrontal cortex moderates that and enables us to make better choices while taking a lot of information into account and making the best choices possible. And those choices always seem to be insightful and empathetic, and also moral, because the prefrontal cortex facilitates our insight and empathy, and basically our self-awareness, our capacity to feel empathy towards other people, which means caring about what's happening to them and knowing what it's like to walk in their shoes and caring about it, and being moral in our thinking and our actions. And the other thing too is having more access to intuition. Maybe I'll do a podcast about intuition sometime, but I'll tell you what, if you get an intuition and you doubt it, the doubt comes from your limbic brain, because the limbic brain doesn't believe anything that it can't smell, hear, taste, see, sense with the body. It's a brain that only trusts the senses because that's how it evolved. But the prefrontal cortex has the capacity to take on a huge amount of information that we're not always conscious of taking. And so the limbic brain can actually doubt it. Every time you doubt your intuition, you might actually be making a mistake. So intuition is a good thing. Now about integration, I'd like to read that out loud. When a system becomes integrated, it is the most flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. This flow of energy and information that links separate elements together has the objective experience of harmony. Like a choir singing Amazing Grace, each singer retains his or her own individual voice while simultaneously linking together with intervals that drive the flow of the whole song. The sensation of harmony is the subjective side of the physical state of integration. This is a small paragraph, but it says so much. It alludes to something that Ziegel talks about a lot in his writing, which is that the brain, our psychology, our mind, human relationships are actually complex systems. When you listen to a choir that sings something amazing and each singer lends their own voice to the experience, but what you hear isn't one singer or 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 singers, you hear something beyond that. That's the experience of a complex system which cannot be reduced to its actual individual components. This is what happens in the brain as well. And we experience it as a sense of harmony. And harmony is the exact opposite of what people bring to internal harmony, is the exact opposite of what people usually bring to therapy. When people come to therapy, they're often in a state of a kind of an inner war where bits of them are fighting each other, and there's often quite predictable patterns. So the reason I'm mentioning all of this again is because people are skeptical about it, and I don't blame them. They say things like, oh, it can't be too simple. It seems too simple. What you mean? I just validate my emotions and my brain integrates? And the answer is yes. That's how learning in the brain works. That's what we always do. When you learn something and you practice, that's what you're doing to your brain. You're enabling it to retain the knowledge, and then you can recall it next time. When you learn to drive, you practice and practice and practice. Is it simple? Well, the actual thing you do may not be, but the idea of practice is simple. In psychotherapy, we are teaching the prefrontal cortex to validate the limbic brain in order to open channels of communication between the two, which enables then the brain to respond by creating connectivity between the brain. Better connectivity, neurons also expand and grow exponentially, and we get neural networks. Once we have a neural network established, after a great deal of practice, we now can retain that particular knowledge. In terms of our psychology, what it means is the brain just work together as an integrated system along the same lines of what I've just read to you about integration. So yes, it's simple. Is it easy? Not necessarily. People who have trauma, for example, will find this practice a bit more difficult, and it'll take them longer to do vertical integration. People without trauma find it usually easier and quicker, but everybody gets the results because it's predictable. That's how the brain works. If the brain is healthy, then you get the results. You just have to practice. There is no harm in any of this practice. So if you try it, you have nothing to lose. I do not practice a faith-based profession. I'm not asking anybody to believe me. This isn't faith-based. What I do is evidence-based. I can't play Russian roulette or a game of guessing game with my clients' brains, with my clients' mental health. It's very, very serious. People's mental health determines everything about their lives. So I have a very responsible job. I wouldn't experiment on people if I didn't know what I was doing. I wouldn't just base my work on guesswork. When people are skeptical about this too, I don't blame them either, because my own profession, I mean, the professions of psychotherapy and psychology have traditionally been really separate um, from the brain. And I think I explained it in the first episode that there just wasn't enough knowledge at the time. But it's time to update what we do, and it's time to update our thinking. Uh, Ordinary people, everybody, therapists and people and clients need to understand that the brain plays an absolutely crucial part in our psychology. Psychology does not happen in the ether or in our hair. It happens inside the brain. So when we're working with people's psychology, we're effectively working with the brain. And the thing is, we know what to do now. And as I said, don't believe me, give it a shot and see how you go. Now, I don't know how many of you perhaps tried to put into practice what I taught last time, which is how to do the vertical integration. And I hope that you have, and if you persevere with that, you will start to see a difference in yourself. And one of the differences that I point to my clients to start to notice as the vertical integration improves is that their anxiety levels will start to be reduced. So if, I mean, on an imaginary scale of, I don't know, 0 to 10, it's completely imaginary. If somebody says, well, their average level of anxiety on a normal day will be 8, then once they start to integrate vertically, they begin to notice that their anxiety levels goes down. And I can tell you right now that it is possible to live completely anxiety free. Given that so many people suffer from anxiety and that people are usually told that all they have to look forward to is to manage it, I'm actually telling you something different. I'm telling you that for the vast majority of people, it's completely possible to live completely anxiety free. Now, I'm also speaking from experience. I come from an extremely abusive childhood that left me with severe trauma. And I lived from the beginning of my life, anxiety was normal to me. I never knew anything else. I've never also met any adults or anybody around me who wasn't anxious. So anxiety was totally normal. I didn't feel good, and I always had this feeling that I had to overcome something in my life, in my everyday functioning, even as a child. But it was just normal. We normalize everything. What's around us, we normalize very, very fast. And that's got advantages and disadvantages, and probably for another podcast as well. So anxiety was normal. What we didn't have where I grew up was a word for it, because it was so normal. It was so part of the ecosystem that we didn't even have a word in Hebrew for anxiety. The word for anxiety charadot, came later in my early 20s, that suddenly the word started to enter the language, the spoken language in Israel, where I grew up. So, and it's funny because that society is so riddled with anxiety that it took a long time before they even had a word for it. And I think it only happened because people started to look at what's happening in other cultures, and then they began to learn from it, and that's how the word entered into that society. Um, I know anxiety intimately. It was extremely high in my case, and I spent several times in my early 20s in particular going in and out of A&E or emergency, depending on which country you come from. It's the emergency part of the hospital where you go in when you're in some kind of emergency. And I used to go because I thought I was going to die. I either had something going on in my head and I thought I'm going to die, or something in my heart, I thought I was going to die. That's called an anxiety attack. An anxiety attack is when the person experiences such high levels of anxiety that they actually believe, they truly believe that they're going to die. So that's called a panic attack. A panic attack is more severe than an anxiety attack. And a lot of people who have anxiety attacks think they have panic attacks. I don't expect people to necessarily use professional terminology in everyday life. It's fine. But anxiety attack is just a great deal of anxiety, really peaking very high, and it's very scary. And panic attack is when you really think you're dying. And then I would go to hospital. Um, I would say to the doctor, something's terrible, very bad with me. And then they do give me a brain scan. And I had a couple of brain scans. I had heart monitors. And I was very young, but they still took me seriously. And then they'd come back to me and sheepishly say, look, there's nothing wrong with you. And I'd feel horrible because I was convinced that I was dying. And so to hear that there is nothing going on was very disturbing because I wanted an explanation for what was going on with me. I did not understand the relationship between my psychology, my mental state, and the trauma I was carrying, and those experiences of anxiety. And sadly, no doctor or anybody else had ever the time to actually tell me about it or ask me about it. I remember one GP asking me, do you feel stressed? And of course, I said no, because at 20, I think I was 26, I didn't want to admit that I was in such a disaster inside. So I actually lied. And I know a lot of people do as well. Um, it feels like anxiety can feel like a personal failure. But I would like to tell you that it isn't. So when I speak about anxiety, I'm not speaking just from a professional point of view as a professional, mental health professional who studied about it. I'm also speaking from personal experience. And I can confirm to you 100% that it is completely possible to recover from anxiety, even coming from the severe trauma that I come from. And I will talk about trauma in quite a lot of detail in subsequent podcasts a bit later on in this whole series. And I think trauma is so important that I will talk about it probably for more than one podcast. So anxiety is something that people recognize in themselves. They know when they feel it. They feel the physical impact of it. They feel the emotional impact of it. It's very, very uncomfortable. They feel jittery. They feel hearts can be palpitating faster. They're confused in their thinking. They panic. They don't know what to do. They feel lost. Do you recognize these experiences? These are the experiences of when the limbic brain takes over. So what I'd like to tell you is the word anxiety actually annoys me a little bit. It was useful for me when I learned it, but it also just means fear. Anxiety is fear. What the medicalization of mental health has done is that it's given fear, completely normal fear, the name of anxiety, and made it into a kind of a condition. Fear isn't a condition, but anxiety, you can say, is a condition. But anxiety is not a condition. Anxiety is a symptom of something else. And to put simply, anybody with unresolved trauma is going to live with high levels of fear, therefore anxiety. People who are living in bad situations, maybe people who are subjected to domestic abuse or bullying at work. And by the way, if you are, please don't just sit there and listen to me, but take action and do something about it. If you are indeed in a bad situation where people are mistreating you, make sure you're not isolated and reach out for help as soon as possible. So nobody can be well when they're in a frightening or threatening situation, or when they're carrying unresolved trauma from childhood, where their brain is constantly telling them that they are in a state of threat, that something is threatening them. Even if there isn't anything in the moment, their brain is wired to think that there is a bear there all the time. So they feel anxious, which means they're feeling scared. Now, I've already made the connection between that sense of anxiety where you kind of lose yourself, you don't know what you're doing, you feel lost and small and frightened and stupid maybe, and maybe ashamed, depending on on other people's, everybody's history, what's wired into them. But anxiety is not your fault. Anxiety is not anybody's fault. If somebody feels it, it means that their limbic brain is trying to tell them something. But because they're not listening, because there is not enough integration and they've not learned to do that, the limbic brain is on its own. It's trying to communicate something, but there's nobody listening because connectivity is not there. The prefrontal cortex is not listening. The limbic brain's already shut it down, but the limbic brain actually does need to communicate the danger to somewhere or someone in order to keep us safe. When the original experience, the original worry that the limbic brain has is not communicated successfully, then the limbic brain ups the ante. Basically, it screams at you. Anxiety, especially high anxiety, is what happens when the limbic brain is absolutely screaming, asking, can you please pay attention to what I'm trying to tell you? Because of the pathologizing of anxiety, instead of listening to it and what it's trying to tell people, people are looking at the anxiety itself and looking at that as the problem. So in my little book on anxiety, I give the example of, let's say you put your hand in a campfire. There's a fire and you put your hand in the fire. What you're going to feel? You're going to feel horrendous pain because this is the body's way of telling you you're in a dangerous situation. If you keep your hand in that fire, it will burn and you will have a disability. And it's very dangerous. So the body gives you pain, intense pain, which will make you pull your hand out. But imagine a situation where I put my hand in the fire and I feel pain, and somebody else comes to me and says, oh, well, let me give you an anesthetic. So instead of listening to the pain and what it tells me, we numb the pain. So anxiety isn't our enemy. Anxiety is a wake-up call. It's a call, a desperate call from a limbic system that says there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but there's something going on. And who's paying attention? Nobody's paying attention. So if you think of children, and I will again have an episode, quite a big thing on parenting and on children, which is very important. But you think about a child who is trying to tell the parent that they're frightened of something or something's not right or they're worried about something. Children worry about a lot of things because they're really small and inexperienced. They have no power. So they don't know. So things worry them. Children live in pretty much a permanent state of fear, or at least very close to it. So imagine that the child's trying to tell something to a parent or to an adult, that something's bothering them, but they are dismissed. So they're dismissed, or the parent is busy, or the adult's saying, oh, come on, don't be silly, that's not important. What do you think the child's going to feel? So the child's afraid of something, something's worrying them. It doesn't matter what we think about it. It doesn't matter if we think it's really serious or not. The child doesn't know that it is. The child's reaching out to an adult who's more experienced at being human because they're older, trying to get some guidance, trying to get some help. But if the adult is dismissing it, then the child is left alone with that original worry or fear. And now they're also being dismissed. So the fear escalates. So if a child is ignored and something bothers them, those of you who are parents or teachers probably know that children naturally escalate their behavior because their behavior is trying to communicate, look, something is bothering you, you need to pay attention to me. So if you like, the fear that the child feels when they're being ignored or dismissed, when they're trying to communicate something, the adult brain experiences it as what we call anxiety, essentially. So I'm not buying this business about children being anxious or adults being anxious. I'm thinking, okay, what's not being listened to? What is the message that needs to get across and is not getting across? And why is it not getting across? So one of the things about anxiety that is important is that people who have trauma from childhood, developmental trauma, tend to suffer from anxiety pretty chronically, which is what I did. So it's there all the time. There's an underlying layer of fear that never goes away. Sometimes it peaks and sometimes it's a little bit less, but it's always there. When the trauma is integrated and is gone, then there is no fear anymore. And the fear that you might feel will be appropriate to the situation. You're facing a bear, I expect you to feel fear. That's completely normal. But there is none of that constant rumbling of fear under the surface that interferes with people's functioning. When we begin to integrate vertically, anxiety begins to go down for a very simple reason. The limbic brain is finally being listened to by the grown-up in the brain, who can make better decisions, who is a regulator. So the limbic brain feels a bit more calm. Well, I passed on the message. now this grown-up is going to do something about it. So the more you validate, the more you integrate, your anxiety levels are going to start to go down. So the important thing I'd like to emphasize to everybody is that, one, anxiety is not in itself a condition. It is a symptom of something else. So it could be a symptom of an actual trauma, which is unresolved, and a lot of people carry unresolved trauma. The guesstimate is about 50% in the Western world, where things are relatively calm. Much worse in places where there's war and inequality and political oppression, of course. And so people with trauma will experience chronic anxiety. People who are insufficiently integrated but do not have trauma can also experience anxiety. And they actually find it paradoxically more difficult to come to therapy because they think, well, my life's been good. I don't have anything going wrong. My parents loved me. I was always reasonably safe at home. Nothing happened to me in particular. Why am I anxious? I should be able to do my job well. I'm qualified. Why am I anxious? Why am I suffering from anxiety all the time? And they feel really ashamed. They think I'm taking your time. I shouldn't be here. I should leave this for people who are really suffering. First of all, I tell people, look, if you're feeling that way, you are suffering, and you have every right to be here, and you have every right to get the attention that you require. But also, the issue there isn't that the person has trauma or is in a bad situation now. The issue is they're not sufficiently integrated. With insufficient integration, even without trauma, people are likely to feel anxiety in situations where they should be actually functioning perfectly fine. Somebody who is a trained professional in some profession that they have, super qualified, very experienced, should not be going to work feeling anxious about their work. But they will if there's not enough integration and the limbic system thinks it's supposed to be in charge. So I find a lot of people in a huge variety of profession walking into the profession and feeling anxious when really they shouldn't, and they don't have a big complicated trauma history. So like absence of enough integration can cause the limbic brain to try to be in charge in situations it shouldn't. So it's the way I say to people is like, imagine that, well, I'm a GP. Okay, can you imagine sending your 15-year-old kid to do your job as a GP? How do you think the 15-year-old kid will feel when you put them in the consultation room and they're supposed to be the GP? And people say, oh, that would be terrible. They will be very scared. Well, that's kind of what happens when you're not integrated enough and you're trying to do an adult job, but you don't know that your limbic brain's taking over. Or what can also happen is that people will be able to function out of here in their high-level job or in their job, but when they finish the day, they will go home and they'll kind of collapse, and all their fears will come to the surface, and anxiety, and they also feel like a fraud. The imposter syndrome people keep talking to me about is basically what happens when a child goes to do a job of an adult, as in the limbic brain is supposed to function for me as a psychotherapist or for a doctor or for a solicitor or something like that, or anybody really in their job, a teacher, and it feels out of its depth. And so if you did put a child, dress them in adult clothing and put them to do a job of an adult, they'll feel like an imposter. They feel like they're just playing a role. And that will make them feel like, oh my God, I could be found out. What if I'm found out? That's what an imposter syndrome is. But it's very simple to solve. When you integrate the brains, you're less likely to go to work and try to function out of your limbic brain. And you're more likely to put that in charge while listening to everything your limbic brain has to tell you, which is very important. But it acts more as your safety officer, not as your manager, not as your captain, not as the leader of the brain, if you like. So to feel like a proper adult without anxiety, fitting perfectly into your life so that you can live it with ease, and when appropriate, and function appropriately, comfortably, and with a sense of inner harmony, based on your level of knowledge and experience that is appropriate for what you do. That should be done, that can be done much more easily once you're better integrated. So the solution to anxiety is essentially integration. The more you integrate, the less anxiety you feel. And I have to tell you, clients are quite surprised when that starts to happen. if somebody like myself, for example, that never knew a life without anxiety, suddenly starts to not feel anxiety, it can feel quite uncomfortable to the limbic brain. So I'm sometimes telling this to people, and it's really not a joke, but it's funny because when I started to get better, I went to therapy for the first time at age 29. When I started to actually improve a little bit and my anxiety levels were slightly lower, I was worried. My limbic brain would go, "Oh my God, I haven't felt anxiety. I haven't felt this for a day." And then I would almost try to make myself anxious, because if the limbic brain is used to something, what's normal to the limbic brain, what's wired in as standard, as normal, the limbic brain thinks it's safe, even if it isn't great. So any change, including improvement in anxiety, the limbic brain needs to be accompanied gently and in a validating way right through that change. So I remember having to reassure myself, it's okay to feel like this. So when you validate your emotions, you also need to validate those feelings that are better, not just the ones that trouble you. So you start with validating fear, you start with validating anxiety or whatever it is you feel. But when the change begins to happen, you also have to validate all the surprise, the disbelief, the doubt, um, the panic, almost a kind of like a small panic. Oh my God, I haven't felt anxiety, because the limbic brain thinks it's lowering its guard. And if you've lived with high level of guard all the time, that the limbic brain is constantly on alert, that is a big change to go through. So we validate that as well. Every change we go through, including change for the better, as an integration, which makes us feel better and makes us better, has to be accompanied with the constant process of validation, which is what we do. So the solution to anxiety is integration. Vertical integration is one of the most important things that begins to lead to reduction in anxiety. And remember that anxiety is not an illness, it's not a pathology, it's a symptom. Remember, we don't put anesthetic on the hand that's in the fire. We take the hand out of the fire because we listen to the information it gives us. When you are anxious, your limbic brain is trying to tell you something. The question is, what is it telling you? So without knowing, obviously, every person's story, I can't know that. But if you start by validating everything you feel and you improve your integration vertically, then you start to open the way to really listen to what it is that's been bothering you. And for those who don't have trauma, it might be something in the present, it might be something in the conditions they live in. Maybe the relationship's not great, maybe not happy, maybe they're not doing, maybe they are just surviving in life and are not working in the thing that really matters to them. These things can lead to anxiety as well. But whatever it is, the anxiety is a message. Like all of our emotions, it's a natural reaction, a normal limbic reaction to something. It's a message. When anxiety disappears, what we're left with are just normal emotions. So fear is fear, sadness is sadness, disappointment is disappointment, joy is joy, satisfaction is satisfaction. Whatever it is we feel, it's clear. We don't have that kind of complicated cloud of anxiety, which basically is when the limbic brain is by that stage, it's so exasperated because nobody's listening to it for a long time. It's just screaming at you. And if you think about a child, by the time the child is acting out and screaming and jumping up and down, the message isn't clear anymore. But if we listen to the original message, that was much clearer. So we don't want to wait until the child is jumping up and down, a child in our brain. We want to listen to it all the time. So that's why when you begin to do vertical integration, you begin to really listen to your feelings and validate them, everything begins to change. I think I'm going to stop here. I hope that was clear enough. If you have comments or questions, or you want me to cover a topic, please leave comments in the comment sections on all three platforms that I'm on, which is Substack, Spotify, and YouTube, and ask me questions. And if there's a lot of questions about a particular topic, I'm happy to do episodes specifically about that. The next episode will be, I might need to talk about anxiety a bit more. I might talk about relationship. I'll decide closer to the time what I'm going to do, but the next episode will also be uploaded on Wednesday. Wednesday is my client-free day, which is why I can do it on a Wednesday. So thank you very much for listening. Happy integration. I really hope that you begin to enjoy the results of practicing this. Like I said, there is no harm in it at all. It's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to have doubts. Validate those as well. And please do not believe me. This is not faith. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to try it and see the evidence for yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, bye.